We share a ton as fly anglers, whether it's casting advice, new fly patterns, wing sauce recipes, or other tips and tricks. But one thing we all tend to keep pretty close to the vest is where we fish. And for new anglers, this can be really frustrating. Why won't folks just share where they're going fishing? Why all the secrecy? Well, it turns out there's actually a few really good reasons for that, not the least of which is how rewarding it is to go out and find, explore, and discover brand new places all on your own. This week on Untangled, you'll learn why secret fishing spots are actually a good thing and how they benefit both the fish and the anglers. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Today's show is certainly going to stir up some debate, some comments, which honestly is a good thing. That's part of any good community, especially fly fishing. I mean, that's half the reason this show exists in the first place, is there's so much within this sport to endlessly discuss and analyze and look at and learn from. And that spirit of debate, and actually debating this topic of spot burning, of secret holes, and whether we should have secret fishing spots at all. I've been having this debate for honestly as long as I remember. I think honestly as long as I've been fly fishing. I've been talking to other anglers about it, and then I've have some experience of watching fisheries change a lot over the last 20 plus years. And that's all informed me, those discussions and that firsthand experience that's informed my opinion that if you have the opportunity to keep a fishing spot secret, you ought to do it. It's going to benefit things in the long run. Now, it is a bit of an oxymoron. I got to address that right off the bat, because there's no such thing as a secret fishing spot in fly fishing anymore. It just doesn't exist. I mean, shoot, this is not an exaggeration. But before I sat down to record today, I researched every river that I have fly fished in over the past year, and all but two of them had either a YouTube video with the actual name of the river in the title, had a magazine article or blog post, or some of them had all of those and multiple of those out there on the internet. So this information, it's not impossible to find. Usually the only thing standing between you and discovering a new fishing spot is the time to do the research and then the time and money to get to that new spot. So if we're working from that reality, which is that all the information's out there, it's on the internet, why does it matter then if we talk about secret fishing spots? Why do we get so up in arms? Why is this such a hotly debated topic? Am I just trying to hog all the best spots for myself? I've been accused of that a couple of times, that, oh, you just want to hog it all. Or it's been on the other end of the spectrum, and I've been accused of wanting to ruin it for everybody. But would I be doing this show? Would VFC exist as we do if it weren't for the fact that we want folks to live real life? We want you to go out there and experience these unforgettable experiences you get while you're on the water. If I didn't want that, I wouldn't do this show, and VFC wouldn't exist, because that's our goal, is to help you get out there and enjoy it. I want people to go out and enjoy fly fishing, and I think part of enjoying fly fishing are the secret spots, the honey holes, and that's just one of the reasons. There's actually three that I think secret spots, honey holes, whatever you want to call them, actually benefit fly fishing in the long run. So let's take a look at what I think those three reasons are. And the first one is the exploration and the adventure side of things. Because part of the fun of fly fishing is finding somewhere new to you, going out there and exploring and discovering something on your own. I don't know about you guys, but I've always had this desire to go out and find new places. I remember as a kid, I was really lucky, grew up kind of central-ish Utah, and my parents bought a house on the side of the mountain, and I could look out bedroom window and I could stare at the peaks of the Rockies. And I always had this desire to go climb all the mountains, and eventually I climbed a lot of them around there. I wanted to go climb Everest. I went through my mountain climbing phase where I was practicing knots. Like, I'm going to go summit Mount Nebo in the middle of winter because that would be really cool. Or I'm going to go do Everest Ridge on Mount Timpanogos. And I went through that phase of just wanting to explore and wanting to experience things that seem epic and seem unforgettable and don't really get experienced by the vast majority of folks out there. So that was a really a big part of my childhood, is I always had that desire to go out and explore. And I also really wanted to know what it would be like to be one of the mountain men back in the mid 1800s who were exploring out here in the Rockies for the first time, laying eyes on a lot of this country before all the other people got to do that. It just there's that sense of adventure and freedom that's very alluring to me. And with fly fishing, you get a little bit of that. You get a taste of your own frontier almost, because it takes you to places that you would never visit otherwise. I would not live where I do right now if it weren't for fly fishing. Half the reason I moved to this corner of the cowboy state is because fly fishing is incredible here. The other half the reason is I had a job here, and that's a whole other story. But I interviewed for this job specifically because I'd be close to great fly fishing. But it'll take you to all these cool places. You'll see, random small towns. You'll find these great little diners. You'll meet people. You just get to experience part of America that largely gets forgotten and overlooked. And it enriches your life in a lot of ways to have these experiences, I think. And just one of these is one story. I could do an entire podcast of cool things I've seen when I'm out fishing, but one thing really kind of takes the cake. Years ago, back when I still lived in Utah, that's where I grew up. But back when I still lived there, I used to fish this lake all the time. It was a few hours from my house, but when the ice was off and the weather was good, I would try to be down there like a couple times a week because it was just so much fun. And there's huge brook trout and cutthroat in this lake. I'd haul my float tube in with me and I'd float tube the lake. It was so peaceful and quiet. I just loved it. Well, I was back in there during October one year, and the elk were the peak of their rut. So as I'm hiking in to this lake with my float tube on my back, the elk are screaming in the aspens all around me. They're just going nuts, and it was so cool. And then I get to the lake. I get out of my float tube. I kick out there. I'm in the middle of the lake. I'm just fishing. The bulls are screaming all around me. And then this huge bull elk actually busts through the aspens on the opposite shore. He stands there and he plants both feet and just roars at me, almost like a dragon. And I don't know if he was bugling at me or what. Maybe I looked like a cow elk to him or something. I don't know. But it was really cool to have that elk come relatively close and scream at me and get to watch nature just be nature like that. Nature in its most unaware state is one of the most incredible things you will ever witness. And you get to see a lot of that as you're out fly fishing. And then I ended up hiking out that night in the dark, and the elk they were screaming even more as I was hiking out in the dark. It was just incredible. One of the most unforgettable nights of my life, days of my life, really, ever. But then for a fishing specific experience, I'll give you another story. I know I said I have one, but let's do another one. A fishing specific experience. A few years ago, right when I moved to this part of Wyoming, there was this river that I'd heard about from a few people, but I'd never been to it, never driven to it. I'd looked at it on the map, and one person had told me that the fishing was okay. So that's really all I had to go on. But it looked good, and I wanted to go explore it. So I call Alex. He comes up with me. It's early spring. It's stupid cold. The wind's blowing because it's Wyoming, and that's what it does here. There's snow just spitting everywhere. Just miserable, kind of. Really not a great experience. But we looked at the map. We found some public land for this river, and hiked down into it, and we ended up having one of the best fishing days that we've ever had together. We caught dozens of fish, including some huge browns. Alex caught a nice cutthroat. and then a ton more whitefish than Alex wants to admit. We caught a bunch of those. And this river's actually rocketed up the charts of being one of our favorites to fish now. And it's one that we plan trips around year after year to go back and fish because it was so much fun. And we took that risk to go and explore it and to go see it and to go figure it out. And if we'd never done that, we would have lost out on some of our most memorable experiences ever. I mean, we were up on this river earlier this summer and ran into bears on back-to-back days. Now, one of them was definitely a black bear. Alex thinks the other one was a grizzly. I don't think it was because we didn't get a good enough look at it to see, but that's a whole other story. But anyways, it really just, it felt even sweeter, honestly, when we explored that because we took that chance on the spot. We worked the water. We put our flies where we thought the fish would be, and we got rewarded for it. And it's really hard to explain just how fulfilling that is unless you experience it yourself. But I think the closest I can come to relaying this to you is if you've ever built something. I do woodworking. I talked about that a couple of weeks ago here on the show. I do a little bit of woodworking in my spare time. And there's this satisfaction that you get from a project coming together where it's really not so much the final product as it is once it's all put together, once the last coat of varnish or stain or whatever you're doing to finish it, once the last coat of finish is on, you step back and you see all the steps it took to get there. And then you see that final product. And it's just this sense of, I did that. I made that. And it's a very similar feeling you get when you go out and explore somewhere and take a chance on a fishery you've never been to before. And you get to experience those elk screaming or one of the best days of your life on the water when the weather is just awful on a river that A, was deserted. We had it to ourselves. And B, was giving us we caught a brown that was almost 18 inches, and I'll take that any day of the week when I get into wild trout like that. It's just, it's really amazing. And if you just get pointed to a river, you just get told where to stand, what flies to use, what direction to face, how deep to fish them, it really just takes away from that sense of accomplishment. And fishing, you'll learn this the more that you fish. It really is less about the fish and more about the act and process of going fishing itself. That's what keeps you in this. And if you take shortcuts, you're going to get bored with the sport really quick. You're not going to build those experiences of satisfaction, of trial and error, of learning. You're not going to have that rich history of failures and successes to keep you going back to the river. If it's just, well, go here, use this fly, stand there and catch a fish. It just takes all the fun and the exploration out of it. And if you're not willing to explore and get skunked while you're exploring, this probably isn't the sport for you. It really probably isn't. I mean, shoot, I spent a week once backpacking for golden trout. I caught a grand total of 3 brook trout the entire trip. That was my grand total of catches. No golden trout anywhere. I had a lot of fun. It was an amazing trip, but it was really hard. It was 35 miles and 15,000 feet of elevation gain, and we didn't even catch what we were going for. But I still look back on that trip with a lot of fond memories because those tough trips, they're part of that experience. They're part of living real life like we talk about all the time here at VFC. And if you go out and you have those epic experiences, getting skunked stings a lot less, I promise. Now, before we move on to point 2, I do want to just circle back real quick to the idea of exploring new rivers and then specifically casting to where I expect the fish to be. I know that trying to find where fish are on a new river that you've never been to before, that can be one of the most daunting parts of this, and that can inhibit a lot of people from going and exploring because you've figured out where they are on your river. You're not so sure if you can do that on another river. Well, we actually put together a whole ebook. It's completely free, but this free ebook goes into all the details of how to read water, how to identify where the fish are going to be, so that no matter where you go fishing, if it's on a tiny creek or a big river, you're going to be able to look at that, read the water, put your flies in front of fish, and dramatically increase your chances of putting some of those in the net. So again, that ebook is free. I will throw a link to that in the show notes, or if you're watching the video podcast, there will be a link to it here on the screen. So you go grab a copy of that, and then you don't have that standing in your way of potentially not going exploring. Now you've got the guidebook on how to find fish in rivers. You go out and explore and have those experiences for yourself. It's going to be awesome, I promise. Now, the second reason that it's worth keeping some places secret is how the fish react to pressure. And this idea spans points 2 and 3, but I'm going to focus on two different aspects of it. So this first one is exactly how do the fish change when there's a lot of pressure on a river. If you find a spot and you post about it, or if everybody posts about this spot, then what you're going to end up with is tons of people going there, which is not a bad thing. I'm not against people going out and exploring, but not every fishery can handle that kind of pressure. And even the ones that can are kind of suffering. And I'll get to that in a minute. But let me give you an example here. There's this river not too far from where I live that in the last 5 years, it has just exploded in popularity. It's not a secret anymore. It went from being 1 or 2 outfitters in town to, I think, almost 8, along with 2 full-service fly shops, a couple of mom-and-pop fly shops. During the summer, you'll see 40 to 50 boats on the water regularly, which is crazy because it's not that big of a river. A couple dozen waiting anglers. It really is just Grand Central down there during the summer, which honestly is understandable because the fish are huge and the hatches are really good. They can be some of the best hatches that you'll ever get into. But in the past, once you got into mid-July or so, the hopper fishing just was off the charts. You'd catch tons of nice fish on big foam bugs. It was great. But this year, I heard from multiple guides, buddies of mine who live and fish down there all the time, that the hopper fishing just basically never turned on. And last year, it wasn't really great either. It's been in this downward trend. And it's not because we don't have enough hoppers. We've got tons of hoppers everywhere around here. They're out there eating my grass in my garden all the time. There's plenty of them to eat. There's a lot of theories floating around about why this is, but I've seen this happen to other rivers before. And the one that I put most stock in is that the fish have just learned how to be wary of those hoppers. They're just not eating off the top as much as they used to because they've learned that, oh, there's probably a pretty good chance I'm going to get hooked if I eat that hopper-looking bug. I even see that on a season-by-season basis down on the Green River in Utah, for example. By the time you get to August, those fish are so wary of eating dry flies. They'll come up to eat if you can get them to, and they'll be so timid. They'll be so scared. It's like they're second-guessing themselves the entire time that they eat. And by the time you get to August, they're eating off top a lot less than they used to. Now, part of that is there's fewer hatches going on, but the fish that do rise, it's just, you can tell they're scared just by watching their behavior change from spring to August. And they really go from being picky fish to almost impossible to catch. It's really frustrating. So that is how you will see the fish change in some ways, where they make that drastic, almost 180-degree turn. They wise up very quickly, and then that means we have to adapt. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but then you start to wonder, well, is this really good for the fish? And then a lot of the reasons we fell in love with that river in the first place kind of gone, right? The dry fly fishing attracts a lot of us, especially during the summer, to go out to these places. And if that disappears, it really is kind of sad to watch that go by the wayside. And then point number 3, again, we're looking more at how the fish react to pressure. They're going to change their behavior, but then the fish themselves are also going to change because most fisheries cannot handle a ton of anglers. That's just the reality. And in a lot of places, with very few exceptions, and the exceptions are almost always tailwaters, rivers that come from beneath a dam, they're very controlled environments, and they're usually very heavily stocked as well. But when you get a ton of pressure on a fishery, usually the fish size decreases and the amount of fish decreases as well. And this isn't just some theory according to Durant. It's not something I came up with in a wing stupor one night as I'm out here yelling about all the youth on my dadgum river. No, it wasn't anything ever like that. It's been documented in a scientific journal all the way back in 1966, actually, out in North Carolina. And part of this study, read through it yesterday, really interesting. But part of this study says that, quote, wild trout populations deteriorated after 2 consecutive years of 40 trips per acre per year, end of quote, to the river that was studied. So they studied this river to see how fishing pressure would impact it, and wild trout populations deteriorated once they got above that 40 trips per acre of water per year threshold, which for that river they determined was the tipping point where the wild trout population would start to suffer. And I've seen this personally. I can add anecdotal evidence to back this up. One of my favorite rivers that I've ever fished, I started fishing it more than a decade ago, probably 12, 13 years ago now. And the fish out there used to be huge. And this is not one of those fish stories. It really was. The average fish size was pretty stinking close to 19 inches. They were just beautiful brown trout eating off the top. They were very eager to eat. Lots of fun. And you go out there and you had a legitimate shot at a 2-foot brown trout every single time you went fishing there. Whether you landed them or got the drift right was up to you, but you had a shot at a fish like that. And it was a wonderful place to go because there's not many places you get a legitimate shot at that many big fish. Well, over the past decade, I've watched that fish size just nosedive, and the fishing pressure has gone up probably tenfold. If not tenfold, at least 5 times more anglers than there used to be out there. And the last trip out there that we did, I think the biggest we caught was 17 or 18 inches, which is not a bad fish. I'm not complaining, but most of the fish used to be that size, and most of the fish we caught on that last trip were 14, 15 inches at best. There were a lot of 10 to 12 inches that we caught. It really just, it was a completely different fishery. The big fish just weren't there like they used to be. So when you start putting a ton of pressure on fisheries that can't handle it very well, you will see that happen. So that's one reason why a lot of us just keep things to ourselves, because we've seen that happen. It's not out of this desire to gatekeep. We get accused of that all the time. And I'm using the royal we, anglers who've been out and we don't want to share where we go fishing, and people just, you want to keep all the great fishing spots for yourselves. Well, okay. Like I said at the beginning of this, if that was true, then why are we doing what we do here at VFC, right? The Untangled wouldn't exist. VFC wouldn't exist. We want folks living their life. We want folks making memories, having unforgettable experiences on the water, but not every piece of water needs to be put on blast on social media, because not every fishery is resilient enough to handle all that pressure and not end up with a bunch of tiny fish everywhere. The ones that do stand up to the pressure, where the fish size doesn't decrease, they end up getting so crowded that the fishing experience changes. It's not as fun as it used to be. And then the fish themselves suffer. In fact, the North Platte in Wyoming, one of the most famous stretches of river probably in the whole country, but they just made some big regulation changes to it, where you've got to use barbless hooks now on most of the river. And this method of using a pegged bead was outlawed. So a pegged bead is just a little bead that looks like a trout egg, and it's on your leader up above a bare hook. And the trout will eat the bead, and then you set the hook, and that hook catches them in the corner of the mouth. But they're often really big hooks, and then a lot of times you'll end up snagging them. It's a very effective way to catch fish up in Alaska. That's, from my understanding, that's where this technique originated, was up in Alaska. But that's been banned on the North Platte as well, because the fish were getting so many injuries and getting caught so many times because there's so many people on the water, that Wyoming Game and Fish did a study and found that almost 25% of the fish in the river had some sort of injury. Not just evidence of being hooked, but injury, like their face was messed up, they're missing their mandible, their eyes were gouged out, some sort of injury because of being hooked and handled poorly, especially with barbed hooks. So they're moving to a barbless hook regulation to try and protect the fish. So even though the fish size hasn't suffered a ton, the fish themselves have. And at that point, you've got to step back and wonder, okay, is this sustainable anymore? Is this, what are we doing here? Okay, because if we're killing a bunch of fish, it's really not worth it at the end of the day. Okay. And I'm a big fan of go out, keep your limit, from places that can handle it and eat trout. I've eaten tons of trout in my day. I'm a big fan of that. But, these catch and release fisheries that we manage for trophy fish like this, usually it's catch and release for a reason. But again, that's a whole other conversation we get into later. But you will see fisheries suffer from pressure. So that's why that if you notice, I rarely ever mention where we film or where we fish in our videos or in the podcast. And that's on purpose because I don't want to hotspot places. I want to do my part to make sure that the fish aren't being mobbed. I really do. And, we could actually sit here and talk about there is a very legitimate argument to be made about, well, are we hotspotting rivers with our videos that we make here at VFC? Are we part of the problem? And someone even told me that earlier this year. We were out on the water and they said, "You're ruining the river. You're making a YouTube video. You're going to ruin it." Well, if you've been to the river before, you might recognize it from the videos that we do. But if you haven't fished it before, you probably not going to find it. And there's a big difference between going out to the river and using the river as a teaching tool and showing, hey, here's how to cast, here's how to mend, here's how to pick flies, here's how to handle when this situation happens, or here's how to handle when this hatch comes off. Using the river as a teaching tool versus just going out there and saying, hey, I'm at X spot and I'm using these flies and, I'm standing right here and the flows are such and such, and just giving everybody all the info that way. One is helping you become a self-sufficient angler, which is our goal. And the other is just shortcutting, like I talked about earlier, and not teaching you the principles. And that's why we focus so much on giving you the tools you need to find places to fish. In fact, we've got a video about how to find a place to go fish. And when Alex put that video together, his entire thought process was, okay, how do I find a place to fish? I'm going to teach those principles so that people can use those principles to find their own places and go out and have the same kind of experiences that I've had, that Spencer's had, that we've all had here at VFC, versus just, here we go, here's, go fish at X, Y, and Z. One is teaching you to be self-sufficient and helping you become the angler who values the solitude and values these wild places, and will do your part to take care of it. And then the other is just, well, here's how to go get a fish picture for Instagram. Okay, and which one is more sustainable? Which one is the way that's going to benefit the fishery in the long run, right? So that's what you've really got to balance. So really, it's don't beat yourself up for keeping things close to your vest. It's not a bad thing, and I'm firmly in the camp that we do a little bit better if things were a little bit more secret, I think. Because really, for me, what it boils down to the most is, yes, the fishing pressure can be frustrating. And yes, sometimes you just don't want someone to fish your spot. There's that ownership almost that comes in there. And that's, if it's public water, you've got to learn how to not feel that way and share. But for me, it really all comes back to the first point that I talked about, which is the opportunity to go out and explore and to find that. That is so much stinking fun that I don't want to take that opportunity of exploration away from somebody by just saying, go fish here. I feel like that's not fair. I feel like that's not doing justice to the experience they could have if they were able to go out and really do that. Because I know how much that's changed my life. Those experiences of discovering and adventure and exploration are why I'm sitting here behind this microphone doing this podcast, because I love this stuff so much that I can't really hold down any other job. No, it really comes back to the fact that I want other people to have that experience, right? It's so much fun. I don't want to cheat you out of it. That, for me personally, that's what all this comes back to. The other stuff matters, but it is secondary to that opportunity to go out and explore and to live real life. So I know it was probably a lot. Hopefully Y'all enjoyed that. You got to see a bit of the thought process that goes into why a lot of anglers, not just myself, but a lot of anglers are probably a little hesitant to share their fishing spots. So if you agree, if you disagree, if you've got anything to add to this discussion, please drop it down in the comments. I'd love to keep having this talk because, again, this is what informs us. This is how we move forward as a community. So drop those comments if you would. But certainly don't go anywhere, because even though we're done talking about secret fishing holes, we still have the Q&A section of the show to get to. And if this is your first time here at Untangled, welcome. You picked a great week to be here. But we spend half the show every week directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, you can go ahead and send those on in to me. There's a link to do that in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Dustin from Colorado's got our first question, writes in and says, do you have any thoughts on having several rigs tied in advance for multiple scenarios? I understand that it depends really plays into fly selection, but one of my elderly neighbors keeps dozens of rigs preset so he can quickly alternate with a triple surgeon's knot when a hatch starts instead of taking 20 minutes to fully re-rig and potentially missing a hatch entirely. Thanks for the time and your 2 cents. Dustin, this is a good question. A couple of thoughts for you. First off, I'm not sure at all how you're going to haul all those pre-tied rigs with you to the river without getting them into just a giant tangled mess. I guess one way you could do it is you could put one fly in the top slot in a fly box and then the bottom fly in that rig in the bottom slot in that fly box. But that's a pretty big waste of space, and then that really doesn't solve the problem of all that tippet in there just getting tangled everywhere. It really just seems like it's just, you're going to spend more time untangling them and getting them ready than I think you would if you just tied that rig on in the first place. And that doesn't even mention the fact that you're going to need to adjust the distance between those flies to different distances based on the time of the year. Early season, if it's a dry dropper rig, you're going to need a lot less distance than you will in the middle of the summer when the flows are high. And then again in the fall, that's going to go a lot shorter between those flies. So I don't know. It just sounds like more work than it's worth. Almost like a solution that's in search of a problem at this point. I'm not really sure. You know that you mentioned the guy's just an older feller. I'm not sure how he's got things rigged up. One thing that I do know does help older folks who are definitely having some vision problems is on the small flies, tying 5-6 inches of tippet through the eye of the hook when you tie that fly, and then you attach that to the rest of your leader. That can really help in some instances. So maybe that's what he's talking about. But having rigs pre-tied, just I don't know. I'm not a fan of it, because I'll get into those in a minute. But part of the other problem too is it shouldn't take, you mentioned this in your question, it shouldn't take 20 minutes to re-rig to take advantage of a hatch. If it's taking you that long to re-rig on the water, then you need to do some knot practice at home. And that's not derogatory. That's just fact of the matter. It really shouldn't take that long. And just to give you an idea of what a rig change-up looks like for me, a couple weeks ago, I'm out floating the river with my buddies, and I started out with a dry dropper rig, which is a move I'm sure will shock longtime listeners of this show. I didn't catch anything for like an hour. So I changed the rig up. I changed the dry fly and the dropper both out. I went from a small parachute Adams and a scud. I took them off. I put them in my box, and then I tied on a brand new hopper, about 2.5 feet of tippet, and then a crawdad imitation as a nymph. And that took me maybe 3 or 4 minutes to complete. And most of that was because I couldn't find my box with the crawdad nymphs in it. I forgot which pocket of the vest it was in. So it really doesn't take too long. Now, I've been fishing for 20 years, more than 20 years now. I've been a guide. I'm pretty quick with my rig changes because I've had a lot of practice. But there's no reason a wholesale rig change should take you 20 minutes. Even as a relatively newcomer to the sport, you should be able to get it done pretty quickly. And again, if you're not able to do that, practice those knots at home. Another reason that I just don't like the idea of preset rigs at all is I really don't like to even rig my own rod up until I get to the water. I know some anglers feel differently and they rig up in the parking lot or whatever, but even on my local creek, which I know very well, almost like the back of my hand, uh, I won't rig up until I've gone down to the river. I've got to look at the water. I know how deep my dropper should be if I'm going to fish a dry dropper. I've got an idea of if the fish are up at all, if they're looking like they're eating emergers, if there's any kind of hatch coming off it. I just want to get all the information I can before I re-rig. Now, I'll have an idea of what I want to fish because I know the creek very well, and I know I know the bug trends, and I know what should be coming off when, but I still don't make that final decision until I've gotten to the river, taken a look at what's happening, and then I put my rig together based on that. So that's really why I think pre-tying rigs is going to end up with you trying to force feed flies to fish that they may not necessarily want at depths that they might not even be at. So you're going to have a hard time getting flies in front of fish and making them look real consistently with pre-tied rigs. So I'm just not a fan of that. Again, the more you practice your rigs and your knots, the quicker you're going to get at it. It's really very simple. I wouldn't worry about pre-tying stuff. I would just, again, go to the river, base your fly selection on that. And hey, if anything else, this gives you carte blanche to go out and practice more, right? Oh, I got to practice my knots. I got to go to the river. Okay. You're welcome. You can even tell your boss I said that, hey, he's got to go out and practice his knots more. So let him go early on Wednesday, not on Friday. Everybody's on the river on Friday. Let him go early, middle of the week, so he can have some peace and quiet to himself. Oh, well, hopefully that helps. I appreciate the question being sent in, though. Thank you. Al from Utah has our next question. Writes in and says, I wouldn't say I'm brand new to fly fishing, but still on the newer side. I found a fishing spot here that I've been fishing all summer, and it's been fantastic. I'm talking every time going out, I'm catching 7 to 10 brown and rainbows using nymphs. I've noticed lately, though, that at this spot, the fish aren't biting like they were just a month ago. Now I'm lucky to get 1 to 2 bites. I'm using all the same items I was using previously. I haven't noticed a drastic change in water level. I'm wondering what could have changed and what can I do to try and improve my odds. Love the podcast. Thanks. Al, thank you. Appreciate it. And good question. Thanks for sending this in. So, 2 things have happened in the past month for you. First off, the water's warmed up significantly, just about everywhere in the West, unless it's a tailwater with a bottom draw dam. Water's warmed up pretty significantly. So that's going to change some things up. And then the seasons have also started to change. Leaves are changed out there. The bull elk are starting to bugle. We're getting into the thick of it now. It's definitely fall instead of summer. And one thing that you mentioned that's worth honing in on here is that while all those changes have been going on, you haven't changed anything with your rig. You said you're fishing the same way you were a couple of months ago, and the fishing just kind of dropped off for you. And that really is the problem because the menu for the fish is going to change as the seasons change themselves. It's kind of like why I don't eat wings for every meal. I could, but then I'd be bloated, I'd be greasy, and I'd want to change my order up eventually to garlic parm instead of buffalo. And, it starts a spiral at that point. Because if you're eating garlic parm wings, what are you even doing? No, I'm kidding. Garlic parm wings are great. But as the seasons change, the bugs that are active are going to change too. So hoppers are quickly getting off the menu as the temps change. You start getting frosts in your area. There's fewer and fewer hoppers out on the water. Your midges and mayflies are starting to become the dominant part of a fish's diet instead of the caddis that they were going in all summer. And then with that water warming up, the fish are looking for cooler water. They want a lot of oxygen in that water as well. So that means they're moving to a lot of the riffles, or they're in the deep pools where they can cool off. So they're not necessarily even in the same spots they were a month and a half, 2 months ago, because, again, things are changing. The fish have to respond to those changes. So even though you mentioned you didn't notice too much of a change in water levels, the fish have still probably moved a little bit as well because the water temps have changed. So they're looking for that cool, highly oxygenated water that fish, especially trout, love. So you've got to do two things. You've got to start changing up your fly selection. We actually have a great resource for that here at VFC. We put together a year-round hatch chart that has all the bug trends and what flies you should think about fishing as the year progresses, no matter where you're fishing. So I'll throw a link to that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. That'll help with the fly selection side of things, but you definitely got to start changing those flies up a little bit to see what the fish are eating now, because it's not going to stay constantly the same. And then the second part, and this is more important than changing the flies, but you got to start fishing different types of water. Look in those riffles that I mentioned. Look in the deeper pools. Check in the runs. Because remember, your job is to put flies in front of fish and make them look real. So if you're not getting bites, it means that either your flies aren't in front of fish or they don't look real. Now, based on your past success, I don't think you have a problem getting flies to look real because you were catching fish consistently and you're still getting bites. So I don't think you have an issue with your presentation. It's about where the your fly selection. It's about the presentation, where those flies are in the water column, where you're getting them to. So mess around with how deep your nymphs are, mess around with the types of water you're fishing in. And then if that doesn't start to work, start tweaking your fly selection a little bit as well. And as you start to piece all this together, you're going to paint this little picture of where the fish in your local river move this time of year, what bugs they start looking for, and you can keep this all tucked back in the memory banks there for next year so you don't go through another lull. You can just make the switches, make the changes as the seasons progress. So hopefully that helps. I appreciate you sending the question on in. Jacob from Michigan has our next question. Writes in and says, how do I teach my wife to fly fish when it's hard for me to get out and fish as well? Jacob, that's kind of a catch-22, isn't it? If you can't get out there and fish, how are you going to teach her? No, in all seriousness, you will have a hard time teaching your wife how to fish if you're not out on the water personally. You're not out there learning and figuring it out. So the first thing, though, that you got to do is you've got to kind of gauge her interest level. Like, is she really excited to do it? Does she really want to learn? Or is she just kind of putting up with it because, you're her husband and she's trying to be supportive and nice? My wife and Alex's wife both, they don't dislike fly fishing, but they don't love it either. They're willing to go do it a couple of times a year to humor us, but it's not... They've got a free Wednesday afternoon. They're not running to the river. That's not their first idea of a fun time, but they'll still come out and do it. And so because of that, Alex and I have both kind of, we both backed off the teaching a little bit because we don't want to force it, right? We'll take them out when they want to go. We'll have fun, but we're not really trying to force it at that point. So if your wife's really interested, if she's gung-ho, really wants to learn, that's awesome. I would definitely start by having her watch the beginner masterclass. That's going to help a ton. Just getting her that foundational knowledge, especially if you can't get out to the water a whole ton together. But I'll also tell you this too. I know very, very few anglers who have successfully taught their spouses to fish, whether it's husband teaching wife or vice versa. There's something that's really tough about teaching your spouse to do something like fly fishing, and we're not always great at listening to each other. I think it goes for every couple out there. Personally, I know that when I take my wife out, I'm way too impatient. I'm way too hard on her. I'm an awful teacher, and I don't know why. I wish I could pinpoint why, but it's like this switch flips, and my patience just goes away, and it's really frustrating for me because I feel like I'm an awful husband. I'd like to change that about myself, but it's a reality. I have to be very careful with my tone and with how I teach stuff, just so I'm not coming across as mean, unfortunately. So, and I know that situation plays out a ton in a lot of relationships. So, and who thought you'd be getting relationship advice here at Untangled, right? We do more than just fly fishing, folks. We're here to help you in every aspect of your life. No, I personally, this is what I think. I think you'd be better off taking a guided trip and both of you learn from the guide together. Your wife's probably going to listen to the guide better than you will, and she's probably going to outfish you because that's what always happened when I took couples out guiding. But seriously, that to have a third party teach, it just takes the pressure off you. You get to fish and enjoy it. She gets to fish and enjoy it. It just, the couples that fly fish together that I know that still fish together a lot, they all started that way, where they went out for a couple of trips. A guide taught them both the ropes usually, and that kind of jump started their learning process from there, and they were able to feed off of each other. So that really is what I would recommend in your situation is go spend that money with the guide and avoid any of the fights if you possibly can. So I appreciate that question, Jacob. And that wraps up the Q&A section of the show this week, folks. But don't go anywhere because we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week, we end the show by sharing a story and pictures from folks who are out there living real life. We talked about that a ton earlier in the show today, but going out there and having those unforgettable experiences, we want to hear those. We want you guys to share them with us. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you would like to share, there's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you are watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Jake, who writes in and says, "Hey guys, my name is Jake. In the last year, I got back into fly fishing after not touching a fly rod in nearly 10 years. I joined a veteran group called Project Healing Waters here in Colorado Springs. Even though I haven't touched a fly rod in 10 years, everyone in this group of amazing vets and active duty men and women were eagerly willing to help me out. I've done 2 trips as well as a net building class with them, and I learned something new every time. I've gotten lifelong friends out of this group. With this boost of confidence, it's hard to keep me out of the water now, and I will forever pick a fly rod instead of a normal conventional rod and reel." Jake, thanks for sending that in. Project Healing Waters, they do great work. Been a big admirer of theirs for a very long time. Taking vets and service members out fly fishing to help them deal with some of the unfortunate side effects of serving in the armed forces. So it's really cool you've got to go out and have that experience, Jake. So thank you so much. And thanks for sharing it as well. With that, folks, we're going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you for being here, for listening, for watching to the entire show. That does more to help us out than you can understand. And if you want to help us out even more, we've got tons of flies for sale. We've got our 3-packs for sale. You can go check those out. But what's really going to help us out the most is tell everybody else about VFC and about Untangled. Spread the word so that we can help more folks get out there and live real life. And speaking of getting out there and living real life, go spend some time on the water this week. Practice your knots. Go catch some fish. And until next week, everybody, live real life.